4 Hezbollah fighters who were exposed to chemical agents in Syria are now being treated in a Beirut hospital. A source told the Daily Star that the 4 came into contact with chemical agents while searching a group of rebel tunnels in the Damascus suburb of Jobar over the weekend. In other words, they stumbled upon a rebel cache of chemical weapons. Of course, some take that report with great suspicion. One alternative explanation is Hezbollah's men were collateral damage from Assad's chemical attack. An equally plausible possibility, but more alarming, is that Hezbollah was handling the chemical weapons. In a report from Stratfor, it says that the West has warned the Syrian rebels to expect a military strike within days, sources said. The rebels have given the West a list of targets, Reuters reported. A senior Jordanian official said August 27th that Amman will not allow its territory to be used for military actions against Syria, AFP reported. The anonymous official's comments came at the end of a meeting of senior military officers on the regional impact of Syria's civil war. Now for Stratfor's Geopolitical Weekly by George Friedman. Images of multiple dead bodies emerged from Syria last week. It was asserted that poison gas killed the victims, who, according to some numbered in the hundreds. Others claimed the photos were fake, while others said the rebels were at fault. The dominant view, however, maintains that the al-Assad regime carried out the attack. The United States has so far avoided involvement in Syria's civil war. This is not to say Washington has any love for the al-Assad regime. Damascus's close ties to Iran and Russia give the United States reason to be hostile towards Syria, and Washington participated in the campaign to force Syrian troops out of Lebanon. Still, the United States has learned to be concerned not just with unfriendly regimes, but also with what could follow such regimes. Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya have driven home the principle that deposing one regime means living with an imperfect successor. In those cases, changing the regime wound up rapidly entangling the United States in civil wars, the outcome of which have not been worth the price. In the case of Syria, the insurgents are Sunni Muslims whose best organized factions have ties to al-Qaeda. Still, as frequently happens, many in the United States and Europe are appalled at the horrors of the Civil War, some of whom have called on the United States to do something. The United States has been reluctant to heed these calls. As mentioned, Washington does not have a direct interest in the outcome, since all possible outcomes are bad from its perspective. Moreover, the people who are most apathetic that something be done to stop the killings will be the first to condemn the United States when it starts killing people to stop the killings. People would die in any such intervention, since there are simply no clean ways to end the Civil War. Now on to Obama's red line. Since U.S. President Barack Obama therefore adopted an extremely cautious strategy. He said that the United States would not get directly involved in Syria unless the al-Assad regime used chemical weapons, stating with a high degree of confidence that he would not have to intervene. After all, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has now survived 2 years of civil war, and he is far from defeated. The one thing that could defeat him is foreign intervention, particularly by the United States. It was therefore assumed he wouldn't do the one thing Obama said would trigger U.S. action. Al-Assad is a ruthless man. He would not hesitate to use chemical weapons if he had to. He is also a very rational man. He would use chemical weapons only if that were his sole option. At the moment, it is difficult to see what desperate situation would have caused him to use chemical weapons and risk the worst. His opponents are equally ruthless, and we can imagine that using chemical weapons to force the United States to intervene and depose al-Assad, but their ability to access chemical weapons is unclear, and it found out the maneuver could cost them all Western support. It is possible that lower-ranking officers in al-Assad's military used chemical weapons without his knowledge and perhaps against his wishes. It is possible that the casualties were far less than claimed, and it is possible that some of the pictures were faked. All of these things are possible, but we simply don't know which is the truth. More important is the major governments, including the British and French, are claiming knowledge that al-Assad carried out the attack. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry made a speech August 26, clearly building the case for military response and referring to the regime attack as undeniable and the U.S. assessment so far as grounded in facts. Al-Assad, meanwhile, has agreed to allow UN inspectors to examine the evidence on site. In the end, those who oppose al-Assad will claim his supporters concealed his guilt, and the insurgents will say the same thing if they are blamed or if the inspectors determine there is no conclusive evidence of the attack. The truth here has been politicized, and whoever claims to have found the truth, whatever it actually is, will be charged with lying. Nevertheless, the dominant emerging story is that al-Assad carried out the attack, killing hundreds of men, women, and children, and crossing the red line Obama set with impunity. The U.S. president is backed into a corner. The United States has chosen to take the matter to the United Nations. Obama will make an effort to show he is acting with UN support, but he knows he won't get UN support. The Russians, allies of al-Assad, and opponents of UN-based military interventions, will veto any proposed intervention. The Chinese, who are not close to al-Assad, but also oppose the UN-sanctioned interventions, will probably join them. Regardless of whether the charges against al-Assad are true, the Russians will dispute them and veto any action. Going to the United Nations, therefore, only buys time. Interestingly, the United States declared on Sunday that it is too late for Syria to authorize inspections. Dismissing that possibility makes the United States look tough, and actually creates a situation where it has to be tough. Now the consequences in Syria and beyond. This is no longer simply about Syria. The United States has stated a condition that commits it to an intervention. If it does not act when there is a clear violation of the condition, Obama increases the chance of war with other countries like North Korea and Iran. One of the tools the United States can use to shape the behavior of countries like these without going to war is stating conditions that will cause intervention, allowing the other side to avoid crossing the line. If these countries come to believe that the United States is actually bluffing, then the possibility of miscalculation soars. Washington could issue a red line whose violation it could not tolerate, like the North Korean nuclear-armed missile. But the other side could decide this was just another Syria and cross the line. Washington would have to attack, an attack that might not have been necessary had it not had its Syria bluff called. So in order to avoid a mix-up with both Iran and North Korea regarding their nuclear programs, it looks to Stratfor believes that the United States must go to war against Syria, or at least have a strong showing against Syria, or it could be viewed as a bluff to other countries such as North Korea and Iran, and that would be a tragic problem. There are also the Russian and Iranian questions. Both have invested a great deal in supporting al-Assad. They might both retaliate were someone to attack the Syrian regime. There are already rumors in Beirut that Iran has told Hezbollah to begin taking Americans hostage in the United States if the United States attacks Syria. Russia, meanwhile, has shown in the Snowden affair what Obama clearly regards as a hostile intent. If he strikes, he thus must prepare for Russian counters. If he doesn't strike, he must assume the Russians and Iranians will read this as weakness. And as you can see from this analysis, it looks like that Mr. Obama is in a no-win situation, especially with no real support from home. Syria was not an issue that affected the U.S. national interest until Obama declared a red line. It escalated in importance at that point, not because Syria is critical of the United States, but because the credibility of its stated limits are of vital importance. Obama's problem is that the majority of the American people oppose military intervention. Congress is not fully behind an intervention, and those now rooting the United States on are not bearing the bulk of the military burden, nor will they bear the criticism that will follow the inevitable civilian casualties. accidents, and misdeeds that are part of war regardless of the purity of the intent. The question therefore becomes what the United States and the new coalition of the willing will do if the red line has been crossed. The fantasy is that a series of airstrikes destroying only chemical weapons will be so perfectly executed that no one will be killed except those who deserve to die. But it is hard to distinguish a man's soul from 10,000 feet. There will be deaths, and the United States will be blamed for them. The military dimension is hard to define because the mission is unclear. Logically, the goal should be the destruction of the chemical weapons and their deployment systems. This is reasonable, but the problem is determining the locations where all the chemicals are stored. I would assume that most are underground, which poses a huge intelligence problem. If we assume that perfect intelligence is available and the decision makers trust this intelligence, hitting buried targets is quite difficult. There is talk of a clean missile strike, but it is not clear whether these carry enough explosives to penetrate even minimally hardened targets. Aircraft carry more substantial munitions, and it is possible for strategic bombers to stand off and strike the targets. Even so, the battle damage assessments are hard. How do you know that you have destroyed the chemicals? Certainly there are many unanswered questions that need to be resolved. Whether Assad did launch the attacks, whether the insurgents did, or whether someone faked them doesn't matter. Unless Obama can get overwhelming, undisputable proof that al-Assad did not, and that isn't going to happen, Obama will either have to act on the red line principle or be shown to be one who bluffs. The incredible complexity of intervening in a civil war without becoming bogged down makes the process even more baffling. So Mr. Obama now faces a second time in his presidency when war was an option. The first was Libya. The tyrant is now dead, and what followed is not pretty. And Libya was easy compared to Syria. Now the president must intervene to maintain his credibility. But there is no political support in the United States for intervention. He must take military action, but not one that would cause the United States to appear brutish. He must dispose of al-Assad, but not replace him with his opponents. He never thought al-Assad would be so reckless. Despite whether al-Assad actually was, the consensus is that he was. That's the hand the president has to play, so it's hard to see how he avoids military action and retains credibility. It is also hard to see how he takes military action without a political revolt against him if it goes wrong, which it usually does. So as you can see, Mr. Obama has put himself in quite a mess. If he backs down, other countries will view him as a weak president, leading some to the position that he will bluff. And frankly, I probably see Mr. Obama taking that direction because I think that it kind of lines up with what will happen in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Now certainly that's speculation on my part. He may go ahead and lead an attack against the Syrian regime, which wouldn't be out of line either. But if I were to guess, I would say that he's probably going to bluff and there will be no attack. And I think that this will lead to an attack against Israel, in which many will protest as they are now, but they will not come to Israel's aid. So this particular situation could very well lead to a significant prophetic event in the very near future. But certainly I don't see this developing into any type of World War III activity or some type of Psalm 83 scenario. But it most certainly could progress into what will happen during Ezekiel 38 in the Gog and Magog war, where Russia comes down and seeks to take a spoil, and Israel's Western allies just simply protest, and that's it. And I see that as a very plausible scenario that could take place very soon. Well, I hope this analysis has shed some light on the event and what could very well take place in the near future. And as always, if you don't know the Lord, you need to come to know Him as soon as possible because your time is running out. Well, this is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.